Why the founder of KFC sued KFC. The crazy history of KFC all began when at the age of 40, Colonel Sanders got a job in Kentucky with a Shell, running a gas station. And in order to make some extra money, Sanders planned to prepare meals. Since he was a gifted cook, he arranged a single table for his backroom customers, where he sold ham steaks, green beans, and hot cookies. However, fried chicken wasn't originally on the menu as it took too long to cook it. It took about 30 to 35 minutes that he couldn't keep up with demand. He realized deep frying was the way to cook it quickly, but that usually made chicken far too dry, crispy, and unevenly cooked. But then Sanders made a great breakthrough, as by that time, the pressure cookers were becoming more widely sold, and while they were normally used for vegetables, Sanders decided to try it for chicken. It took a lot of tries to find the right settings and the right balance of time, pressure, fat, and filtration, but eventually, Sanders discovered a way to make the chicken perfectly. It took about 8 or 9 minutes, which also retained the flavor of the chicken, and it got even better when Sanders experimented a new blend of spices, which he later named his secret blend of 11 herbs and spices. The chicken rapidly became a bestseller and was a huge hit with travelers. There was a self-defense incident that took place, which led to his competitor being behind bars, which let Sanders dominate, and local sales from his gas station food shot up, especially his fried chicken. In 1935, Kentucky earned such a reputation that Governor Ruby Laffoon gave him the honorary title of Colonel to acknowledge his service to the state of cuisine. So the honorary Colonel title wasn't related to his military rank, but Sanders took it wholeheartedly, and from then on he went by Colonel Sanders, with many referring to him simply as Colonel, instead of his real name, Harland. This meant he had to move out of the gas station and open 142-seated restaurants instead. It had taken him until his 40s, but he finally seemed to be succeeding. But soon Sanders' bad luck appeared to have returned, as his restaurants burned down in 1939, and by the time it was rebuilt, World War II had broken out, which meant no tourists or travelers in transit, who were his main source of customers, and so he had to sell the place. But he didn't give up. When the war was finally over, Sanders started a new restaurant, which flourished into the 50s, but then the next bad news came in the form of a new interstate highway being constructed and bypassing Sanders' location completely, and thus drastically cut his sales, and with it he was eventually forced to auction off his business at a loss. So now at the age of 65, he had no business and no other income except his saving. So he decided, what if instead of running a restaurant himself, he could franchise and let other restaurants sell his chicken and charge 4 cents for every chicken sold. So Sanders would throw a couple of pressure cookers in his car along with a huge bag of his famous condiment and hit the road in his 1946 Ford. His plan was to travel across the US to find good franchisee restaurants. It surely wasn't an easy life. He had to live out of his car, and it was exhausting traveling non-stop. When he came across a restaurant which he thought was suitable, he'd persuade the owner to let him cook his chicken for their employees, and if they actually liked it, he would stay a few days to cook for their customers, aspiring that they'd like it so much that the restaurant wanted to franchise its chicken. For a while, Sanders was met with continuous rejections as he was turned down around 1,009 times before finally someone to agree. His first successful franchise came in 1952 when Pete Harmon of South Salt Lake, Utah, agreed to sell his chicken. Harmon owned a major large chain of restaurants already and said sales tripled in the first year when he started making Colonel's Kentucky Fried Chicken recipe. In fact, it was actually this first franchisee, Paul Harmon, who coined the phrase "finger-licking good," which later became the slogan of the entire KFC chain. Of course, Sanders didn't share the exact recipe with the franchisees as he was scared competitors would copy it, so he sent over the pre-made spice mix, and Sanders always appeared to have a talent for marketing and clearly recognized that the idea of a secret recipe was generating much more intrigue. By the end of 1963, he franchised over 600 branches in the US and Canada and built a multi-million-dollar business. With 900 stores, including some in the UK and Japan, this chicken was a smashing hit, and the franchise model was a huge success. KFC was thriving, but one day, a group of entrepreneurs and investors, led by a 29-year-old named John Brown, came to Sanders with an offer that they'd want to buy his business. John was surprised to learn that KFC didn't even comprise a sales team, and simply relied on restaurant owners coming to KFC through word of mouth to start their own KFC franchise. At first, Sanders turned them down. His business was like a child to him, and he was worried they would ruin it, but John didn't let it go. He upped his offer to buy KFC for $2 million and swore he would never tamper with the Colonel's recipe and always maintain a high level of quality control. He also asked Sanders to stay on as an advisor and ambassador for the company, as he believed Sanders was the face of the company. In 1964, Sanders eventually agreed to sell his business. In 1971, however, John Brown sold the company to a giant food corporation, and that's when things began to change. Unlike John, who had agreed not to tamper with the Colonel's recipes, the new owners of KFC didn't. For instance, they changed the gravy to a version that was a lot cheaper and easier to make. The company executive at the time stated, "Let's face it, the Colonel sauce was awesome, but you had to be a Rhodes Scholar to prepare it." The thing is, Sanders still visited a lot of KFC stores himself, and when he tried the new recipe, he said, "My God, the gravy is terrible. They shouldn't be allowed to sell it. It's pure wallpaper paste." He wasn't a fan of the chicken either. He said it was nothing but a damn ball of dough stuck to a chicken. His criticism was so grating and so public that the one KFC franchisee sued him for defamation in 1978, but the case was dropped. But Sanders was so unhappy with the direction KFC was taking under the new ownership that he opened his own rival restaurant, which he named Claudia Sanders, the Colonel's Lady Diner House. This then led to KFC suing Sanders. In other words, the new owners were suing the company founder, and it was a bitter legal battle over the copyright of his name and whether he should be allowed to run a competing business under using Colonel's branding. To counterattack, Sanders then attempted to sue the new owners in a separate lawsuit, alleging that they had abused his image in promoting products he didn't develop, and Sanders even demanded $122 million in damages. Eventually, they ended up settling, and Sanders received $1 million, but had to rename its competing restaurant as Claudia Sanders Diner House. And by the way, this restaurant still exists today, and is the sole place to get the original Colonel Sanders fried chicken. But Sanders was still a fighter, but in the end died of acute leukemia in 1980 at the age of 90. He was still working until the month before he died, as he said he had no interest in retiring and sitting around doing nothing. Today, there are over 25,000 KFC outlets all around the world, and it all started with one guy who, despite constant failures, rejections, and tragedies, cooked chicken at a gas station.